Hi, you're watching Reddit Shikstore, and if you're looking for a story that doesn't start with butterflies in your stomach and a happy ending, you've come to the right place. My name is Alder. For 30 years, I was a senior forensic geospatial analyst for a consortium that maps things that do not wish to be found. Not lost cities or shipwrecks, those are for amateurs. I mapped clandestine supply routes through contested airspace, the ghost signatures of underground facilities from gravitational anomalies, the erosion patterns of a river that could betray a mass grave shifted by spring floods. My tools were synthetic aperture radar, LiDAR, multispectral imaging, and a profound understanding of how the Earth tells its secrets to the patient listener. I didn't create maps, I deciphered the subtle lies of the landscape. I was a cartographer of truth. My wife, Linnea, was the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Aurora Foundation, an NGO specializing in crisis-ready infrastructure for failing states. She was the diplomat to my spy. Where I found hidden tunnels, she found the diplomatic cover to build bridges over them. She convinced cynical governments and wary corporations to fund water purification plants in flood zones I had identified as future conflict flashpoints. She translated my cold, predictive maps of suffering into narratives of humanitarian opportunity. I admired her sorcery. I charted the coming storm, she sold the world an ark. The contamination of our terrain began with a new surveyor. His name was Cale Renner. He was a resilience futurist, the Foundation's new golden boy. He had the polished demeanor of a diplomat and the buzzword vocabulary of a tech evangelist. He spoke of iterative humanitarianism and building adaptive capacity through narrative scaffolding. He wanted to turn refugee camp layouts into gamified simulations and use blockchain to track the impact journey of a single calorie. He was a man who saw human misery as a design flaw to be optimized. I observed the topological shift. Linnea's language, once grounded in pragmatic aid, began to warp into his jargon. Synergistic vulnerability matrices, trauma-informed scalability, paradigm resilience. Their strategic visioning retreats bled into long weekends at remote think tank lodges. The scent of my world, ozone, cold metal from server rooms, the mineral tang of rock dust from core samples, was replaced on her skin by his scent. Vetiver, black pepper, and a synthetic note of ozone that was a poor imitation of the real thing. The verification came through my own medium. An anomalous signature. Linnea had left her secondary tablet charging in my study. A notification flickered on the locked screen. A calendar alert for a dinner at Le Pretext, a notoriously discreet, members-only restaurant in the financial district. The reservation was under KR. I cross-referenced the date with her official travel log. She was supposedly at a regional donor summit in Geneva that day. I pulled the satellite pass for that location, time, and date from an old, dormant environmental monitoring project. There was no unusual cloud cover. I then accessed, through a legacy backdoor ID never officially closed, the thermal imaging feed from a commercial satellite with a resolution sharp enough to detect human-sized heat signatures. I found them. Two figures, their thermal profiles familiar from 1,000 staff photos, walking from a taxi into the restaurant's private entrance. The Earth itself, through the unblinking eye of orbit, had witnessed the lie. The pain was not a fracture. It was the sudden, catastrophic subsidence of stable ground into a sinkhole. A geospatial analyst does not panic when the data contradicts the official report. He deepens his scan. He looks for the hidden fault line, the subterranean void that explains the collapse. Their affair was not a passion, it was a merger. She was providing him access to the gritty, real-world legitimacy of the Foundation's field operations. He was providing her with the intoxicating fantasy that she could algorithmize compassion, turning the messy, bloody work of salvation into a clean, elegant equation. My restitution would be a counter-survey in 3 phases. A meticulous remapping of their destruction. Cale Renner's empire was built on a single, brilliant white paper. The adaptive gradient. Modeling societal collapse as a predictable function. It was gospel in certain boardrooms. I began a subsurface scan of his career. Before his anointing at Aurora, had run a boutique consultancy called the Mandala Group. It had dissolved quietly. I used my network of data traffickers and retired intelligence contacts to excavate its corporate remains. Buried in encrypted shareholder logs was the reason. A catastrophic, hushed-up failure. The Mandala Group had been paid a fortune by a Southeast Asian government to model the resilience gradients of coastal communities ahead of a massive dam project. Renner's models had confidently predicted minimal social disruption. The reality had been riots, mass displacement, and several suicides. The government had buried the report and sued for gross professional negligence. The settlement had been sealed, and Renner had rebranded, his failure scrubbed from the digital record as thoroughly as a clandestine airstrip from satellite imagery. I did not leak the court documents. I authored a geological report. I anonymized the location and names, but presented the before and after data. Renner's optimistic gradient mapped side by side with the actual, verifiable data on displacement, economic collapse, and violence that followed. I framed it as a cautionary case study in the limitations of predictive socio-spatial modeling under political duress. I submitted it, under a blind peer review process, to the driest, most technically rigorous journal of geospatial ethics in existence. It was published. To the public, it was a snooze. To the insular, hyper-competitive world of humanitarian futurists and the serious defense contractors who sometimes funded them, it was a seismic event. The whisper became a tremor. Renner? Wasn't he the guy whose pretty maps got people killed? Linnea's power was her network, her impeccable reputation as a broker who delivered real-world impact. I needed to induce a carefully calibrated quake. My deep access credentials to the Foundation's secure donor intel platform, a system I had helped harden against external threats, granted me the keys to her kingdom. Act 1 was a subtle tectonic shift. I identified 3 of Linnea's most critical, trust-based donors. Using behavioral algorithms designed to predict conflict, I crafted a series of perfectly timed, minor discrepancies. A water project she had championed in Malawi had its projected completion date pushed back 6 months in internal logs, but not in the donor-facing report. The satellite imagery I procured for a different donor, showing the successful deployment of solar grids in a refugee camp, was from the wrong season. The vegetation was suspiciously lush compared to the reported dry season deployment. The errors were small, plausible, and deniable individually, but formed a pattern of slight misalignment. Then, I used a spoofed email address from a mid-level logistician at a partner NGO to send a carefully worded query to the Foundation's compliance officer. Cross-referencing deliverables for the Malawi Wash Initiative and the Azraq Energy Project. Noticing some data inconsistencies between Aurora's reports and our field logs. Could we align before the joint audit next quarter? The seed of professional doubt was planted not in the heart of a rival, but in the bowels of her own organization. Act 2 was more profound. Linnea and Cale's shared masterpiece was the Aurora Nexus, a real-time, AI-driven crisis dashboard that used satellite data, social media sentiment, and my old predictive models to allocate resources before a disaster peaked. Its brain was a machine learning algorithm trained on decades of my own geospatial catastrophe maps. I knew its architecture intimately. Weeks before the global launch for major governments and donors, I accessed the training dataset. I didn't corrupt it. I contextualized it. I appended a shadow data layer to thousands of crisis events. Not just the geographic coordinates and severity, but the politically inconvenient truths we always omitted. The famine map now included data on which warlords controlled the aid routes. The flood model contained notes on the corrupt local officials who siphoned construction funds. The drought projections were paired with histories of land disputes that would be exacerbated by water scarcity. I didn't hack the Nexus. I gave it a conscience. At the live demo for a coalition of European aid agencies, Cale, with Linnea beaming beside him, showcased the tool. Watch, he said, as Nexus identifies the next high-probability flood zone in South Asia and prepositions virtual resource tokens. The map zoomed in. The AI highlighted a region along the Brahmaputra River. Then, in its calm, synthetic voice, it began its assessment. Primary risk. Seasonal flooding, probability 87%. Secondary risk. Political instability. Historical data indicate 72% of aid materials in this district are diverted by the local magistrate, correlated with a 40% increase in ethnic violence following prior flood events. Recommended action. Conditional resource release pending third-party oversight agreement with Magistrate Rice Office. The room froze. The AI had just publicly named a corrupt official the Foundation had been quietly negotiating with for years. It had exposed the dirty, pragmatic underbelly of humanitarian work that everyone knew about but no one acknowledged. A senior Dutch minister leaned into his microphone, his voice icy. Mr. Renner, are we to understand this tool is designed to bypass corruption, or to facilitate it by identifying the necessary bribes? The scandal was instant. It wasn't a glitch, it was an airing of filthy laundry. Linnea's carefully curated realm of impactful idealism was shown to be built on a foundation of grubby compromise. In panic, the Aurora Foundation's executive board convened in their ultra-secure Situation Room, a facility whose every communication fiber, shielding, and audio countermeasure system I had personally sourced and validated. I knew its isolation was a myth. As they debated damage control in the electronically silenced chamber, I initiated my final overlay. From a terminal miles away, routed through a series of offshore telecommunication satellites I often used for sensitive traffic, I fed a data stream directly into the room's primary display. First, a video clip of Kale, from an off-the-record salon talk a year earlier. He was relaxed, holding a glass of whiskey. Let's be honest, humanitarianism is the venture capital of morality. We're not in the business of saving lives, we're in the business of investing in measurable units of suffering averted. It's about ROI on empathy. The maps, the data, it's just to make the bet seem rational. Then, a crystal-clear audio clip of Linnea, extracted from a voice memo she'd sent me from a war zone years ago, edited with geosurgical precision. Sometimes you have to work with the devil to dig the well. We draw the maps where the water can be, not where the bodies are buried. The story is the only thing that gets the diggers paid. The recordings echoed in the sterile room. They reframed the catastrophe not as a personal betrayal of me, but as a fundamental, philosophical corruption of the Foundation's soul. The board, stewards of billions in empathetic capital, heard their two brightest stars confessing to the cynical calculus beneath the mission. Kale Renner was terminated for ethical malpractice and profound misalignment with core values. Linnea was presented with a choice. A public, career-ending forensic audit of every project discrepancy and donor communication, or an immediate, graceful transition to an advisory role with a generous exit package and a lifetime NDA. She chose the door. In the ecosystem of global aid, where reputation is the only currency, she was now a ghost. The broker was broke. She sits now in the sunroom of our home, a space I designed with sightlines that frame a single, perfect Japanese maple. She is a still point on a blank survey. The woman who negotiated with generals and billionaires now jumps at the sound of the mail slot. She believed she was crucified by a cowardly board, a reckless technologist, and the unforgiving court of public opinion. She looks to me, her husband who understands the permanence of scars on a landscape, for solace. They loved the idea of saving the world, she said, her voice flat as a salt pan, until they realized it was dirty. I handed her a glass of cool water, my cartographer's fingers, steady from tracing miles of invisible contour lines, brushing hers. No, my love, I said, my voice the low hum of a satellite in stable orbit. They didn't love the idea. They loved the map. And you showed them the territory. And I did. I remapped their world. I didn't create their fault lines. I merely conducted the survey that revealed their instability, published the seismic report, and then calmly recommended the condemned structure be vacated. Now, I maintain the daily survey of our shared life. The coordinates are fixed. The terrain is unchanging. And the silence is so vast, so geologically deep, that you can hear the true, enduring feature. The echo of a vibrant continent, now reduced to a single, perfectly rendered, and eternally still cartographic plate, preserved under the non-reactive glass of absolute consequence.